Actually, before I start, check this out.
I'm afraid I believe in nothing. No hopes or dreams, you could have left me dead naive. And not to mention I'm losing count of all my blessings. With all that I've done, it's too late. I can't take back all that I have become. So all that I'm trying to say, I'm looking for a better way. But some days it just gets so hard, and I don't want to slip away. So what am I fighting for? Everything back and more. And I'm not gonna let this go. I'm ready to settle the score. Get ready, cause this is war.
Not a bad showing, right? Team, in this video I'm going to cover a local tournament that I played last weekend, and not only did I win, I didn't drop a single game. Remember, these tournaments give championship points, which contribute to the official Play Pokemon leaderboard that's split by region, in my case, Europe. First things first, let's go over my team. Now, as many of you know, I competed in the first official regional event of the 2025 Play Pokemon season in Baltimore, and I came 4th. But I didn't stick with the same team for this local. I only kept 2 of the same Pokemon. Instead, for this local, I wanted to build around Shadow Drapion, which I think is one of the most flexible and powerful Pokemon in the current meta. I also wanted to use my shiny Shadow Machamp, which, as you saw at the beginning of this video, can cause chaos when let loose. I'm not going to go through every single one of my battles, but what I've done is pulled out a few of my key matches in which, even though I won, I feel like I could have played a lot better, and I want to explain why. In my mind, going back over your battles and identifying your mistakes is one of the best ways to improve at Pokemon Go PvP, and lucky for you guys, I made plenty of mistakes. So let's go take a look. Our first game was against a friend of mine, Kazim33, and he was running a team that was 5 times weak to Shadow Machamp, with his only real answer being a Clodsire. He also had a Shadow Feraligatr on his team, which, as we know, forms a very strong core with Clodsire, and so I was expecting to see both of these Pokemon in our matches. In my mind, it made sense for Kazim to run an ABB line strong into Shadow Machamp. This would look like a Clodsire lead, which, if it matches into Shadow Machamp, great news for Kazim, but if it isn't a Shadow Machamp, he would use Shadow Feraligatr as his safe swap to bait out Shadow Machamp. Shadow Feraligatr has plenty of play into Shadow Machamp, and even if it loses, Kazim's Clodsire could come back in and take down Machamp itself. As his third Pokemon, Kazim would then run something that's weak to Shadow Machamp, but by this point, Shadow Machamp should be out of the picture. That's the general way that ABB lines operate. So, because I was expecting a Clodsire lead, potentially with a Shadow Feraligatr safe swap, it made a lot of sense for me to lead Diggersby, which has play into both. Lo and behold, we get the lead that we're looking for, and Kazim doesn't want to stay in this matchup, so he goes straight into Shadow Feraligatr. And this is something that I want all of you to pay attention to, because Shadow Feraligatr is not a clean answer to Diggersby, especially when shields are in play. Diggersby can tank a Hydro Cannon, as you can see there, and the Shadow Claws really don't do much damage because they are double resisted by Diggersby's normal typing. Diggersby then reaches a Scorching Sands, and if the opponent doesn't shield, this does do a lot of damage. Diggersby can then start using Quick Attack and one-shield the next Hydro Cannon, and potentially Quick Attack the entire way down. And I don't think Kazim realised this in the moment. He was reaching for that next Hydro Cannon, and he does not make it. Now, Kazim is in a really tricky position here. He can't come back in with Clodsire, Poison Sting won't be enough to take down the Diggersby, so he has to reveal his third Pokemon, which is the Dewgong. And I get out of there straight away into my Cresselia, which has a really good matchup into Dewgong and a neutral matchup into the Clodsire, so I don't mind if he switches in. But he doesn't. He stays with Dewgong and he throws this Icy Wind, which makes sense. But why does he stay in further? And it must be because Kazim thinks that I have that Shadow Machamp in the back, but I don't. So he's not shielding these Grass Knots, thinking that he needs to save his shields for a potential cross chop in the endgame. And I'm totally okay with that, so I start spamming out these Grass Knots. Kazim also realises that he's going to need Dewgong to take out the Diggersby, so it looks like he banks an Icy Wind and comes in with that Clodsire. And honestly, this is when I start to make some mistakes. The Clodsire has energy, and I don't want to take an Earthquake on Diggersby because that would take it out. And so I throw a Grass Knot when I really shouldn't be, because this is debuffed and it does little to no damage. Clodsire was approaching 100 energy anyway, and so I should have just waited, gone over 100 energy on Cresselia if I needed to, and saved both of those Grass Knots for Dewgong in the endgame. I take an attack, and I then come in with a Lowland Sandslash. Again, another mistake. It really should have been Diggersby, and I should have used that Scorching Sands energy. Because I'm now worried that Diggersby is going to be taken out by Dewgong, I don't shield this attack from Clodsire, and it does a ton of damage. Then I make another mistake. I miscount the Clodsire ever so slightly and throw one fast attack early. This Drill Run lands, but it doesn't take out the Clodsire. And that means Clodsire is able to reach its next attack that it wouldn't have if I'd thrown on CMP. I then need to be very careful here. So I come back in with this Cresselia because I know I have energy and I'm able to throw a Grass Knot and get a shield off Kazim. Kazim wants to bank as much energy as possible now because he knows that I still have energy on that Diggersby, and so I get very fortunate that midway through I am able to come in and throw a Fire Punch while the Dewgong is in really low health. Kazim knows that I have double Fire Punch, he knows that he doesn't have 2 attacks and I have a shield, so he lets it go and concedes the game. Honestly, this game was so much closer than it should have been, and so it's important to be able to look back, recognise your mistakes and learn for next time. For my next match, I was up against a player called Sophil, and to his credit, he did bring 2 very cute plushies, but a point against him, he also was running a Skarmory. So let's go see how one of my games against him played out. Sophil had a team that was fairly soft both to Shadow Machamp and to Shadow Drapion, and it was difficult for Sophil to really guess which one of those Pokemon I was going to lean to more. Unfortunately for him, he doesn't quite get the call right. He plays a team that is strong into a Drapion lead and very weak into a Shadow Machamp lead. You can see the shiny Shadow Machamp here up against the Dunsparce. It has to get out of there immediately, but in comes a Skarmory. Skarmory is so slow to reach its first attack after the Steel Wing nerf that my Machamp can go over energy and then throw the really hard hitting Stone Edge. And when this lands, as it does here, it does a ton of damage, and I realise that I can go straight into this Azumarill and start to bubble down. But Brave Bird is going to do more damage than a Drill Run from Dunsparce will, so I do shield this attack, commit to the farm down, and start to get a bit of an energy advantage onto the Azumarill before Dunsparce presumably comes back in. Dunsparce comes in, it starts using Rollout, which honestly the animations are sometimes quite tricky, but thankfully it's the same turn duration as the Azumarill, so I don't need to worry about that in this instance, and I start to go for the slightly more energy efficient play roughs. The switch clocks are misaligned at this point, so I am looking to throw attacks reasonably quickly so that I can have my switch available when I need to, just in case he counter swaps or aggressively brings in his third Pokemon. But you can see that these Drill Runs, they're really not doing very much. It's one of the reasons why I think Azumarill is brilliant in this meta. It sponges so much damage, and it's actually now drawn the shield back from the Dunsparce. So when that happens, I come in very aggressively with my shiny Shadow Machamp, try and get some pressure onto this Dunsparce as quickly as possible and see what my opponent does. Throws a Drill Run. I'm going to have to shield this, right? Shiny Shadow Machamp cannot take an attack, but I don't shield it because I realise that Shadow Drapion also will have a ton of play once this Dunsparce has gone down, because the Skarmory has already gone. Whatever's in the back probably is weak to Drapion. He insta-swaps in Talonflame. Now this is arguably a mistake from him. He didn't wait to see what Pokemon I was bringing in. Actually, Dunsparce would have been a lot better in than Talonflame is. Look at the amount of damage this Aqua Tail does, and bear in mind that I still have a shield. But I make a mistake, and in the end it doesn't impact the outcome of the game, but it could have, and that's what's critical. It could have. I come in here with an Azumarill instead of throwing the Aqua Tail that I have available on the Drapion. Now Talonflame reaches a Brave Bird, which takes out the Azumarill that Dunsparce definitely wouldn't have been able to do just with Drill Run. And I am very fortunate here that the Dunsparce doesn't have energy, because Drill Run would take out my Shadow Drapion. And as we see here, the crunch that I land does not take out the Dunsparce. Thankfully, the Dunsparce doesn't have enough energy and I win the game, but this was not the optimal way to do it, and I did open up a lose con for myself. Again, you learn your lesson. That's what's important. My final match of the Swiss round is against a player called King OWT, and I wanted to show you a game where, because of a mistake that I make, I almost lose. But this is a situation where at the time I had no idea this was a mistake, and so it was a lesson that I was able to take away, and I want to share it with you as well. Going into these games, I knew that my Shadow Drapion had a ton of play into my opponent's team, and we get a good lead here against Talonflame. Shadow Drapion paces so quickly to these Aqua Tails, and because I'm using the 2-turn fast attack Poison Sting, I have a bit more flexibility when it comes to optimal move timing. So I throw this first Aqua Tail after 7. If my opponent wants to throw an optimal move timing, he has to play another Incinerate, which he does here, and the problem is, this allows me to reach a second Aqua Tail and force a shield because there is so much energy on that Talonflame that my opponent won't want to lose. He does another Incinerate and I realise I can come in with the Cresselia because he has to throw once he's reached this 100 energy. And so I'm going to take a Fly, which honestly isn't too bad. My opponent recognises that he will survive the Psycho Cut damage, so he farms back up to 100 energy before coming in with a Serperior, which is a very bulky Grass-type Pokemon. And even a Moonblast from Cresselia doesn't get anywhere near taking this Pokemon into the yellow. My opponent's now counting my Cresselia, and on my second Moonblast you can see that he throws his first Frenzy Plant. The thing is, I'm not quite in Frenzy Plant range, so I know that I will get this Moonblast off, and the switch timer, if you see there, is actually getting very close to expiring, which means my Shadow Drapion can come back in very aggressively and start putting pressure onto my opponent, because we know how much damage these Aqua Tails will do. I end up throwing one Aqua Tail because I don't want to take a charge move from the Serperior onto my Drapion, but I'm still not that far away from my next attack. King OWT, instead of coming back in with the Talonflame, decides to come in with the Clodsire, and Poison Sting is resisted on Shadow Drapion, so I am now going to reach quite a few charged attacks. Aqua Tail is non-stab, but it is still Shadow, and so these start to chunk, especially when I get to multiple. My opponent needs to preserve some health on this Clodsire, so I am expecting him to throw an attack and not fully commit to the farm down, otherwise he will recognise that this Aqua Tail could take out his Clodsire. So he counts those well, he doesn't let me reach my next Aqua Tail, and he throws what will be a Sludge Bomb here to take out the Drapion. But I shield, because I really want this Aqua Tail to go off, and I know he can't even catch it onto his own Talonflame. So I am now forcing the last shield from my opponent. And I can now come in with the Cresselia, which also is not going to be Poison Stinged down by the Clodsire. So the Clodsire has to release a lot of its energy. Gain. And this gives me an opportunity to come in with my Diggersby, with a shield, and hopefully sweep the rest of the game. I start farming up against this Clodsire. I know I have plenty of health to play with, and Earthquake from a Clodsire isn't going to do a ton of damage. But I get greedy. And this is where I make quite a key mistake, because what I don't realise is that certain Clodsire can win CMP against Diggersby. This wasn't something that I had experienced before, and so when I threw on what I believed to be CMP, I was so confident that I would win it. And by losing it, I gave myself a lose condition, because now this Talonflame, remember, has 100 energy, and he is either throwing a Brave Bird, which would take me out, or a Fly, which wouldn't. And I am left with a 50-50 decision that thankfully I get correct. But if I had got that wrong, that is game over. So that was a lesson that I've learned. Pay attention as well, because if you are as confident as winning CMP as I was in this game, that 50-50 might not go your way. So those were our 3 opponents for the Swiss rounds, and for the final Top Cut match, I ended up playing against King OWT again. Thankfully, I'd learned from my mistakes and put on a much more dominant display to win the Top Cut, to win the local, and come away with 50 championship points. But the key takeaway here is that although on paper I didn't drop a game, this was by no means a flawless performance, and there are always areas that we can improve, whether you win or whether you lose. If you'd like to try out this team in one of your locals, I'd love to hear how you get on. I'm also excited to see if any players use Shadow Drapion in the Dortmund regional that's coming up this weekend. I'm actually going to be casting it, so I'd love to see you tune in and let me know if you enjoy the broadcast. Otherwise, team, thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments below what other Pokemon you'd like to see me use. See you in the next one.